Before the fire went out, that's when the best stories were told. Not the polished ones, not the ones that had been cleaned up and made comfortable for daylight. The real ones. The ones that only came out when the night was deep enough and the world outside had gone quiet enough, and the people around the fire had settled low enough that the truth had room to breathe. Tonight, that fire is yours. Take a slow breath. Let your body remember what it feels like to have nowhere to be and nothing left to carry. Because where we're going tonight is 2,000 years away from everything that is waiting for you tomorrow. We are going somewhere that the modern world forgot too quickly and remembered too late. A city so extraordinary, so alive, so full of salt air and merchant ships and the smell of cedar wood burning on the harbor, that when it was finally destroyed, the people who destroyed it wept. You're not going to watch this city from the outside tonight. You're going to live in it. Close your eyes. The Mediterranean wind is already moving through the streets. And somewhere in the market quarter of ancient Carthage, your morning has just begun. Chapter 1. The city that touched the sea. You wake before the light fully arrives. This is not unusual for you. It has never been unusual for you. Not since you were young. Not since the earliest mornings you can remember, when the darkness of the room was still complete and the sounds of the city were just beginning their slow, layered return from the silence of deep night. You have always been someone who surfaces from sleep, gradually, in stages, becoming aware of the world around you in the order that the world offers itself. Sound first, then smell, then the particular quality of the air, and finally, last of all, the light. The sound this morning is the sea. It is always the sea, first. Carthage is a city, built in relationship with the Mediterranean, not simply beside it, the way some cities are beside water without ever truly being of it, but in genuine, constant, daily relationship with it. The sea shapes the city's economy, its mood, its smell, the color of its light, the direction of its wind. And this morning, as every morning, the sea announces itself before anything else has the chance. A low, continuous sound, not the dramatic crash of a stormy coast, but the steady, breathing rhythm of open water in the early hours, when the wind is still finding its direction and the surface of it is moving in long, slow swells that break against the harbor walls with a sound like the world exhaling. You lie still for a moment and listen to it. Your room is simple. Most rooms in Carthage are, even the rooms of people who are comfortable, because the Carthaginian understanding of comfort tends toward the functional rather than the decorative, at least in the private spaces. The walls are plastered smooth and whitewashed, and in the gray pre-dawn light coming through the small high window, they have the color of the inside of a shell. Your sleeping mat is thick and well made. The air in the room has the coolness of a North African night that has not yet given way to the day's warmth, and it carries, along with the salt of the sea, the faint, warm trace of last night's cooking fire from somewhere below. You are home. You dress simply and move through the house toward the morning. The house you live in is what the city's builders would call a modest house. 2 stories, built around a small central courtyard open to the sky, with the rooms arranged around the courtyard's edges in the way that buildings in this city have always been arranged. because the courtyard is not merely an architectural feature, but a philosophy. It is the acknowledgement that a life needs a center, a place that is neither fully inside nor fully outside, where the sky is always visible and the air always moves, and the boundary between the private world of the household and the larger world of the city is negotiable, crossed easily in both directions by light and sound, and the smell of whatever is growing in the clay pots arranged along the courtyard's edges. Your courtyard has a fig tree. It is not a large fig tree. The courtyard is not large enough for a large fig tree. But it is old enough to have developed a character, the way all old things develop character, through the accumulation of seasons and weather and the particular quality of light that falls on them year after year in the same place. Its trunk is the color of pale stone, and its leaves are wide and deep green, and in the early morning they catch the first light before the rest of the courtyard does, and the light through them is green gold and dappled and entirely specific to this tree, in this courtyard, at this hour. You have been seeing this light your entire life, and it has never looked the same twice. You stand in the courtyard for a moment before going further. Above the courtyard walls, the sky is the color that the sky is in the last minutes before dawn, not black anymore, not blue, yet something in between that has no good name. The stars that were visible an hour ago have faded to the point of suggestion. The horizon, what you can see of it above the rooftops of the neighboring houses, has the very first, very faint warmth of the light that is coming. Carthage is waking up. You can feel it before you can see it. The city has a particular quality of aliveness in these early minutes, a stirring, a gathering of itself, a collective drawing of breath before the full business of the day begins. You have felt it every morning of your life, and you still feel it now. The particular privilege of being awake at the exact moment a great city remembers. It is great. You leave the house as the first true light arrives. The street outside your door is narrow, as most streets in this part of the city are narrow. Wide enough for two people to pass each other comfortably, no more. The buildings on either side rise 2 and sometimes 3 stories, their upper floors occasionally extending slightly over the street, narrowing the strip of visible sky above to something between a line and a ribbon. The stone of the street is worn smooth by generations of feet. Your feet? Your parents' feet. Their parents' feet before them. And the feet of everyone who lived on this street before your family arrived and made it theirs. The morning smells of bread. Someone nearby, one of the households whose ground floor opens directly onto the street, whose oven is visible through the open doorway, as a warm orange glow in the pre-dawn gray, has been baking since before you woke. The smell of it is the most fundamental smell in the world, the smell that every human civilization in every time and place has known and responded to in exactly the same way, with the same immediate, uncomplicated pleasure of a body recognizing something it needs. You nod to the baker as you pass. She nods back without pausing. Her attention is on the bread, on the precise moment that requires her full focus, the moment that bakers in every time and place develop a sensitivity to through years of paying careful attention to what happens when heat meets dough and the transformation begins. She is a small woman with strong arms and flour on her forearms, and the expression of someone doing something they know how to do very well. Her bread will be in the market by the time the sun is fully up. You walk on. The city reveals itself in stages as you move through it toward the harbor. This is one of the things about Carthage that people who have never been here before find startling. The way it compounds. The way each street leads to a slightly wider street. Each slightly wider street to a broader avenue. Each avenue opening eventually onto one of the great public spaces where the full scale and complexity of the city becomes suddenly, overwhelmingly apparent. People who visit from elsewhere, from the smaller towns of the interior, from the farming settlements further along the coast, often stop in these moments with the particular expression of someone whose sense of scale has just been recalibrated. You never stop. You have walked this route too many times, but you still feel it. The slight shift in your chest when the street you are walking opens onto the avenue that runs toward the harbor district, and suddenly the sky is wider, and the sound of the sea is louder, and the number of people moving in the same direction as you has multiplied from a handful to a crowd. Each person carrying the particular purposefulness of someone who has somewhere specific to be, and enough experience of the city to know the most efficient way to get there. Carthage, at its height, holds several 100,000 people. Let that number settle for a moment. Several 100,000. In the 3rd century before the Common Era, in the time you are living in, the time that is simply your present and not yet anyone's ancient history, that makes Carthage one of the largest cities in the world. Rome, which considers itself the center of everything and is not entirely wrong to do so, is comparable in size. Alexandria, further along the African coast, is larger, but not by as much as Alexandria would like to believe, and not in a way that changes the essential fact. Carthage is enormous, and living inside something enormous changes the texture of a life in ways you have never had to consciously notice because you have never lived anywhere else. You were born into this scale. You breathe in this scale. The noise of hundreds of thousands of people living their lives, cooking, arguing, trading, teaching, building, praying, sailing, working, resting, is not noise to you. It is the sound of home. The harbor comes into view as you reach the crest of the avenue. And this, even for you, even after a lifetime of this view, this stops you, just for a moment, just for the few seconds it takes for the sight of it to complete itself in front of you, for the full picture to assemble from its parts. The sweep of the circular military harbor to the left, its perfectly engineered roundness containing the warships that make Carthage's naval power the most respected and feared in the Mediterranean. The commercial harbor beyond it, wider and more chaotic, its surface alive with the movement of merchant vessels in every stage of arrival and departure. The lighthouse that marks the harbor entrance, already lit in the pre-dawn, though the keeper will extinguish it once the sun is fully up. The silhouettes of ships against the brightening eastern sky, their masts rising from the harbor in a dense, irregular forest of wood and rope and furled sail. The smell of the harbor reaches you from here. Salt and fish and tar, and the particular smell of wet rope that has been in and out of seawater so many times it has taken on a character of its own. A smell that is not quite the smell of the sea, and not quite the smell of the land, but something that belongs specifically to the place where they meet, and the human work that happens there. You breathe it in. You will breathe it in every morning of your life, and it will always smell exactly like this. Like the city is alive, like the city is working, like the city is doing what it was built to do, which is to be the place where the world's goods come together and move apart and come together again in different combinations, endlessly, profitably, with the particular energy of a place that understands its own value and has been acting on that understanding for generations. Carthage was not always this. This is the thing you know, the thing that every citizen of this city carries in some part of their awareness, even if they do not think about it explicitly on ordinary mornings like this one. The city has a founding story, the way all great cities have founding stories, and this one is true enough to have been told continuously for 5 centuries and still be worth telling. She came from the East, a queen, a widow, a refugee, a woman who had lost a husband to her brother's ambition and a throne to the same, and who had taken what she could carry, and the people who were willing to follow her and set sail into the Western Mediterranean, looking for the thing that people in impossible situations always look for: a new beginning. When she arrived on this coast, this particular stretch of North African coastline, where the land forms a peninsula that juts into the Mediterranean with the harbor potential of a place that seems almost designed for a city, she negotiated with the people already living here for as much land as could be covered by a single ox hide. They agreed, assuming this was a modest request. She cut the hide into the thinnest possible strips, laid them end to end in a great circle, and claimed everything inside it. This story has been told so many times, in so many forms, that it has taken on the quality of legend, which is what happens to true stories that contain a truth large enough to outlast the specific facts. The truth in this one is that the city was built by someone who refused to be diminished, who took the terms offered to her and found, inside them, more room than anyone had intended to give. Carthage, from its first moment, was built on the understanding that the space available to you is larger than the space you are offered. If you're willing to be creative about the measuring, you are standing in what that creativity built. 5 centuries of it. 5 centuries of merchants and builders and sailors and priests and mothers and children and elders and scholars and soldiers and farmers and weavers, all adding their piece to what the queen began on a North African hillside with a strip of oxhide and an absolute refusal to accept that her story was over. You begin to move again, down toward the harbor and the morning's work. Around you, the city is fully awake now. The light has arrived completely. The gold of a North African morning that is a particular kind of gold, not soft the way morning light is soft in cooler climates, but warm and direct, and already carrying the suggestion of the heat that will come later in the day. It falls on the white plastered walls of the buildings and turns them the color of warm cream. It catches the harbor water and breaks into 1,000 small lights, moving and shifting and constantly rearranging themselves into patterns that no one can hold long enough to fully see. The people in the streets around you are the people of Carthage, which means they are many things simultaneously, because Carthage has never been a single thing. This city has been, from its earliest days, a place where the world's peoples come together and remain themselves while becoming something else. The traders who follow the shipping routes here from across the Mediterranean bring more than goods. They bring languages, faces, foods, beliefs, habits of mind and body that accumulate in the city over generations and become part of its essential character. The man walking ahead of you has the darker complexion and the particular style of wrapped cloth that speaks of origins further south, in the deep African interior, where the trade routes begin. The woman crossing the avenue in the other direction wears the dress of the Eastern Mediterranean, the style that merchants from those coasts bring with them when they come to do business in the harbor. The children running past you, 3 of them in the reckless way of children who have not yet developed any relationship with the concept of being somewhere on time, are speaking a mixture of languages that resolves, at the speed they are speaking it, into something that sounds like its own dialect, the dialect of the city's young, which is always a language of mixing and borrowing, and the cheerful disregard for purity that children everywhere and in every time bring to the languages they inherit. You understand all of it. You are Carthaginian, which means you are a citizen of the world's crossroads, and the crossroads has given you ears for more than one way of saying things. The morning is fully established around you by the time you reach the lower streets near the harbor. The sounds have built from the quiet of the pre-dawn to the full, layered complexity of a great city in full operation. Merchants calling to each other across the narrow streets, the sound of hammering from the shipyard. Always the shipyard, always at work, always building or repairing or refitting one of the vessels that keeps the city's economic heart beating. The creak of ropes under load, the slap of water against the harbor walls, the particular cry of the harbor birds, not the inland birds that nest in the city's trees and sing their elaborate morning songs, but the coastal birds, the ones with the wider wings and the harsher voices, the ones that belong to the edge between land and sea, and are most themselves in the space where the two meet. You move through all of it the way you always move through it. As part of it, inside it, belonging to it completely. This is your city. These are your streets, your sounds, your salt air and morning gold and harbor full of ships. This is the place that made you and that you help every day through the ordinary business of living to make in return. The city and its people in permanent, mutual creation of each other, each one shaping and being shaped by the other in the way that all the deepest relationships work. The day is beginning, and in it, as in every day in this extraordinary, irreplaceable, ancient city on the edge of the sea, there is more waiting for you than any single morning can contain. But the morning is a fine place to start. Chapter 2. The markets, the ships, and the life between. The market announces itself before you see it. This is always how it is. The market is never something you arrive at suddenly, never something that appears without warning around a corner and surprises you with its existence. It builds. It accumulates itself around you gradually, the way the city itself accumulates, in layers, each one adding something to the picture until the picture is complete and you are inside it without having noticed the exact moment you arrived. First, the sound. The market's sound begins several streets away, a low, collective murmur that is not yet distinguishable as individual voices, but is clearly the product of many people in the same place at the same time, all engaged in the particular kind of communication that buying and selling requires. It grows as you approach it, gaining definition, separating gradually into its component parts. This voice calling out the quality of their oil, that voice in negotiation with a customer over the price of dyed cloth. Another voice somewhere further enraged in the mock outrage that experienced traders deploy when a customer offers a price that is an insult to the goods. And everyone knows the outrage is performed, but performs it anyway, because this is how the dance goes, and everyone knows the steps. Then the smell. Before the market is visible, it is olfactory. A rich, layered, complex smell that is the sum of everything it contains. The sharp mineral smell of fresh-caught fish laid out on flat stones. The warm, sweet heaviness of dates and dried figs piled in wide baskets. The clean, almost medicinal smell of cedar wood from the lumber stalls at the market's edge, where the shipbuilders come to assess timber. The animal smell of the section where livestock changes hands. A smell that is not unpleasant exactly, but is forceful, insisting on acknowledgement. Underneath all of it, the smell of people, of bodies that have been working since before dawn, of the particular human warmth that a crowd generates when it is engaged in purposeful activity. And then, rounding the last corner, you see it. The market of Carthage is not a building. This is the first thing that visitors from other places, from cities where commerce happens in roofed structures, in designated interiors with walls and doors, always note with surprise. The market of Carthage is a space, a wide, open, sun-receiving space in the heart of the lower city, close enough to the harbor that the ship's masts are visible above the roof lines of the surrounding buildings if you stand at the right angle and look in the right direction. It has been a market for as long as anyone can remember, as long as the oldest elder in the city can remember, and as long as the stories their elders told them extend back into, which is to say, it has been a market since before it was possible to remember otherwise. The ground of it is packed so hard by the accumulated weight of generations of feet that it has the quality of stone without being stone, a surface created entirely by use, by the simple fact of people having stood here, moved here, carried things here, set things down here, for century after century. Around its edges, the permanent stalls. These are the stalls of the families who have held their positions in this market for generations, whose grandparents stood in this exact spot and sold the same category of goods and knew the same neighboring stallholders by name, and whose grandchildren will do the same. A market position in Carthage is not simply a commercial arrangement. It is an inheritance. It is a piece of the city's geography that belongs to a family the way a house belongs to a family, not owned in the legal sense of a document and a boundary, but owned in the deeper sense of long association, of mutual recognition, of the understanding that this spot and these people belong together in a way that the city has accepted and organized itself around. The oil merchant, whose stall you pass first, whose family has been selling oil from this corner of the market since before your parents were born, greets you by name. You greet him back. His oil comes from the groves in the agricultural hinterland behind the city, the wide, gentle slopes where the olive trees have been growing for so long they have become as much a part of the landscape as the rock beneath them. he presses it himself in the stone press behind his family's farmhouse and brings it to the market in tall clay amphoras sealed with wax and cloth and stamped with the mark his family has used for as long as the family can remember. The oil is good, consistently, reliably good, and this consistency is itself a kind of value, because in a market where quality varies and the buyer must always be alert, the merchant whose product never surprises you in the wrong direction has something that cannot be easily priced. You buy a small measure. You do this most mornings. It is not a large purchase, and it is not a small one. It is the kind of purchase that anchors a morning, that makes the transition from the private world of the house and the courtyard into the public world of the city feel solid and real and transacted, part of the daily exchange that knits a person into the fabric of the place they live. Further in, the market thickens, the interior of it, the part away from the permanent stalls at the edges, where the daily vendors set up in positions that shift from morning to morning, according to a system of understanding that has its own logic, even if that logic is not always legible to an outsider, is a different experience from the organized edges. It is denser, louder, more various. The goods here are more surprising, less predictable. A man from somewhere in the Eastern Mediterranean, you can tell by the particular cut of his outer garment and the style of sandal that is characteristic of that coastline, has spread on a wide cloth a collection of small objects that catch the morning light in ways that make passers-by slow down involuntarily. Glass beads in colors that have no natural equivalent in anything you have seen before. A blue so deep and so clear, it looks like a piece of the sea has been miniaturized and made portable. Small carved figures in ivory that are clearly the work of someone with very specific technical skills and a very clear idea of what they were making. Pieces of worked metal, copper, bronze, something that might be early iron, shaped into forms that are partly functional and partly something else, partly the expression of an aesthetic that is different from yours, but no less sophisticated for the difference. You stop. You are not in the market to buy small objects of worked metal. You are aware of this. But the stopping has happened before the awareness arrived, because beauty works faster than intention, and the objects on this cloth are beautiful in the particular way of things made by someone who cared about making them, who put into them not just the skill required to make them function, but the additional, unnecessary, entirely human impulse to make them also mean something, to give them a quality beyond utility that speaks to whoever encounters them across whatever distance of culture and language and time. The merchant watches you look. He does not immediately speak. He is experienced enough to know that the first moments of a customer's attention are valuable and should not be interrupted, that the object is doing its own work in those moments, and the merchant's voice can only diminish what the object is accomplishing on its own. You pick up one of the glass beads. It is lighter than it looks, cool in your hand, with the particular smoothness of glass that has been shaped and polished to the point where it feels like something between solid and liquid. Solid, in fact, but liquid in sensation, yielding slightly to the warmth of your palm, as if it has an internal temperature that adjusts to whatever is touching it. You set it down carefully. You move on. The harbor section of the market is where the morning truly lives. This is the part of the market that connects most directly to the ships, to the arriving cargoes and the departing inventories, and the constant, complex, many-directional flow of goods that is the engine of the city's wealth and the reason for its existence. The merchants here are the ones with the most urgent business and the most complex relationships with each other, with the ship captains who bring their goods, with the officials who record and tax what moves through the harbor, with the networks of buyers and agents that extend in every direction across the Mediterranean world. The harbor market smells overwhelmingly of fish this morning because a fleet has arrived. Not a fleet in the military sense, not the warships of the circular harbor with their rams and their oarsmen and their particular quality of organized, disciplined, deadly purpose. A fishing fleet, 40 or 50 small vessels that went out yesterday evening and have come back this morning with the night's catch, unloading now at the commercial harbor's edge in the organized chaos of an operation that has been performed so many times it only looks like chaos to someone who doesn't know where to look. The fish are everywhere, laid on stone slabs in long rows, piled in wide baskets, sorted by type and size with a speed and confidence that speaks of people who can identify a fish in half a second and place it correctly without looking up from what they are doing. the fishermen and the fish merchants, and the women who will process what doesn't sell fresh into the preserved fish paste. A dark, pungent, extraordinarily flavorful condiment that goes into almost everything cooked in this city, are all here simultaneously, all engaged in their specific piece of the operation, all moving around each other with the practiced ease of people who have been working alongside each other long enough that their movements have become coordinated without requiring coordination. You watch this for a while. You are not buying fish this morning. That is not what brought you to this part of the market. But watching it is its own kind of pleasure. The pleasure of seeing something done very well by people who have been doing it their entire lives and whose competence has reached the point where it looks effortless, even when it is not. The pleasure of seeing a community of people engaged in work that matters, that feeds a city, that connects the sea to the table by the most direct and ancient route available. The ships themselves are always worth looking at. You have been looking at ships your entire life, and they have never stopped being worth looking at. This is the thing about growing up in a harbor city. You develop an eye for vessels the way people who grow up in agricultural places develop an eye for soil or weather. You can look at a ship and know things about it. Roughly how far it has come, roughly what it is carrying, roughly what condition it is in, and how recently it has been repaired, from the way it sits in the water, the state of its rigging, the particular shade of its hull, where the waterline has left its mark. The ships in the harbor this morning are various. Nearest the market side, the merchant vessels, wide-bodied, round-hulled, built for capacity rather than speed, sitting low in the water when they are loaded, and riding noticeably higher when they are not. These are the workhorses of Mediterranean trade, the ships that move grain and oil and wine and cloth and metals and timber and all the other goods that civilizations require in quantities too large for land transport, back and forth, endlessly, connecting the ports of the Mediterranean in a web of exchange so complex and so long established that it functions like a single economic system, even though no single entity controls or directs it. Further out, the sleeker vessels, the ones built for speed, for the carrying of messages, of valuable small cargoes, of people whose time is worth the premium of faster passage. Their hulls are narrower, their masts taller in proportion to their length, their lines more deliberately elegant in the way of things designed to move through resistance with the minimum possible friction. And at the far edge of the harbor, visible but not accessible from where you stand, the warships. They are in a different category from the merchant vessels, different in purpose, different in design, different in the quality of attention they demand. The Carthaginian navy is one of the most powerful forces on the Mediterranean, and the ships that constitute it are built to an engineering standard that represents the highest expression of what the city's craftsmen can achieve when they are given the resources and the mandate to achieve it fully. Long, low, fast, with the bronze ram at the prow that gives them their particular quality of threat, the ability to end another ship's existence by the most direct method available, which is simply running into it at speed with something considerably harder than wood. You do not linger on the warships this morning. There are enough things worth looking at that require no thought of war. You find a space at the edge of the harbor wall and sit for a while. This is something you do when the morning allows it, when the business of the day has not yet reached the point where sitting is unjustifiable, when there is still enough morning left that a few minutes of simply being present in the city, rather than moving through it, feels like participation rather than indulgence. The harbor wall is warm from the sun that has been on it since its first light reached this part of the city. The stone of it is old, older than any single person's memory, older than most of the buildings visible from where you sit, worn smooth at the top by the hands and the bodies of everyone who has sat here before you, which is a number beyond calculation and a continuity beyond imagination. You are one of an unbroken line of people who have sat in this approximate spot and looked out at this approximate view. The harbor, the ships, the sea beyond, the horizon that marks the edge of the known world, and the beginning of the world beyond the known. The water directly below you is clear enough to see the bottom in the shallows, the pale stone of the harbor floor, the shadows of small fish moving above it, the anchor chains of the nearest vessels disappearing into the green depth in long, loose curves. Further out, the color of the water changes, from the pale, transparent green of the shallows to the deeper, richer blue of the open harbor, and then beyond the harbor mouth to the true Mediterranean color, the color that has no adequate name in any language because it is not simply blue or green or gray, but all of these simultaneously, shifting moment to moment with the movement of the surface and the angle of the light and the depth of the water beneath. You look at it for a long time. Carthage reached this harbor and this horizon through 500 years of deliberate, sustained, extraordinary effort. The story of how the city became what it became, how it went from a small Phoenician settlement on an African peninsula to the dominant commercial power of the Western Mediterranean, is not a simple story of conquest, though there was conquest in it. It is, more fundamentally, a story of trade, of the understanding, built into the city's identity from its earliest days, that the sea is not an obstacle, but a road, that the horizon is not a limit, but an invitation, that the goods of one place become more valuable in another place, and the skill of moving them between the two places, safely, reliably, profitably, in volume, is itself a form of power more durable than the power of armies. Carthage understood this before most cities did. The Phoenicians who founded the city brought with them a trading culture already several centuries old, a culture built on the understanding that a small city-state without vast agricultural land or great mineral resources could nevertheless become wealthy and powerful by becoming indispensable to the exchange of other people's goods, by making yourself the place where things come together, by building the ships and developing the navigational knowledge and establishing the relationships that made the whole system possible. Their descendants, you and everyone around you, have been refining and expanding this understanding for 500 years. The result is the harbor in front of you, the ships, the market behind you, the network of trading relationships that extends from the western coast of Africa to the islands of the Atlantic, to the ports of the eastern Mediterranean, to the settlements of southern Iberia, and the islands that dot the sea between. Carthage does not own these places. It does not need to. It is connected to them, which is more useful than ownership and considerably less expensive to maintain.
The midday heat begins to assert itself while you are still at the harbor wall. You feel it first on the back of your neck. The particular quality of North African sun in the middle hours, which is not aggressive in the way of a summer storm, but is absolutely certain of itself, absolutely committed to the warming it is engaged in, indifferent to preferences of anyone who might wish it slightly less thorough. You move back into the shadow of the buildings at the harbor's edge. The city's shifts register at midday. The frenetic energy of the morning market, the calling out, the negotiating, the physical work of unloading and loading and moving and sorting, softens into something different, not stopping, not even slowing dramatically, but changing quality, moving from the sharp, urgent energy of morning that has things to accomplish to the more measured, deliberate pace of midday that knows the afternoon is long and the work that remains will still be there when the heat subsides. People find shade. This is the midday activity of Carthage, the finding of shade and the using of it well. The city has been built with this in mind, the way all Mediterranean cities of this era have been built with the sun's authority acknowledged and accommodated. The narrow streets that feel close and slightly crowded in the cooler hours become, at midday, the city's best architecture. Shaded corridors that channel the harbor breeze and maintain a temperature several degrees cooler than the open plazas, where the sun falls on stone without interruption, and the stone gives back every degree it has received. You move through these corridors on your way toward the upper city. Around you, the city breathes slowly. Conversations happen at reduced volume. Children who were running at full speed 3 hours ago are now draped in various states of horizontal relaxation against walls and doorways, and the roots of the trees that grow in the larger courtyards. Even the harbor birds seem to have reached a mutual agreement about the inadvisability of extensive aerial activity in the middle hours, and are gathered in groups on the harbor wall and the rooftops and the masts of the anchored vessels, arranged in particular configuration of birds that are resting but maintaining the option of immediate departure. The city at midday is not stopped. It is simply between its two energies, gathered in the shade between the industry of the morning and the particular, different industry of the afternoon, which is the industry of thought and conversation, and the slower, more interior work that the cooler parts of the day make room for. You eat in the shade of a courtyard belonging to a family you have known for years. The food is simple in a way that the best food is always simple. Not simple because it lacks sophistication, but simple because it has arrived, through generations of preparation and refinement, at the understanding that the best expression of good ingredients is to do as little to them as possible. Bread from the morning's baking, still carrying warmth in its center, oil from the morning market, pressed from olives grown in the groves and hill country behind the city, carrying a particular flavor of that soil and that sun that no oil from anywhere else quite replicates. Preserved fish, the dark, intensely flavored paste that you have eaten your entire life, and that taste, to you, simply like food, the way the things you have always eaten taste simply like food, without the mediation of comparison. Fresh figs from a tree in the courtyard, not unlike the fig tree in your own courtyard, not unlike the fig trees in every courtyard and every house in this part of the city, because the fig tree is the city's domestic tree, its household companion, the tree that people plant when they plant a courtyard, because a courtyard needs a tree, and a fig tree gives what a courtyard needs: shade, fruit, the quality of green light that broad fig leaves produce when the sun comes through them. You eat slowly. This is the midday rhythm. The eating that is also arresting, the nourishing of the body that is also the nourishing of the conversation. Because eating together in the city is never simply eating. It is the occasion for the particular kind of talk that happens when people are seated and comfortable and not go anywhere for a while. Talk that wanders, that follows its own interest, that has no agenda, and therefore sometimes arrives somewhere more interesting than agendas tend to reach. The family whose courtyard this is have news from the harbor. A ship arrived this morning from the west, from the settlements along the Atlantic coast of Iberia, carrying among its cargo a quantity of tin that the city's metalworkers have been waiting for. And with the ship came a traveler, a man from further north in Iberia, from a place that most people in Carthage have heard of only as a direction, a rumor, a quality of coal that the people who come from there carry in their descriptions of it like a permanent companion. He speaks no language anyone recognizes immediately, but a Carthaginian trader who's been to the northern coast several times is working as an interpreter, and the traveler's account of his homeland, relayed through this double translation, losing something in each passage but retaining enough to be astonishing, is already moving to the harbor district in a way that remarkable things move through a city of traders, quickly, carried on the same networks that carry goods, reaching people who will find it useful before the morning is fully over. This is Carthage. Information moves here the way everything moves here, along the routes built for commerce, faster than anywhere else, in more directions simultaneously. The afternoon comes on slowly, and the shade shifts with it. The courtyard's fig tree, which was throwing shadow across the eastern side of the space at midday, has moved, imperceptibly, gradually, the way shadows always move in the middle of the day when you are not watching them, to cover the western side instead. The light that comes into the courtyard now is different from the morning light. It has a particular quality of Mediterranean afternoon light, which is warmer and more golden and slightly more forgiving than the sharper light of the earlier hours, as if the sun, having spent the day delivering its full authority, is now beginning the slow, beautiful process of releasing it. You are aware in this light of the city around you in a different way than the morning. The morning city was about arrival and transaction and the physical movement of goods and people. The afternoon city is about something else, about the conversations that the morning transactions produce, about the relationships that commerce builds and requires, about the slower, less visible but equally essential work of maintaining the social fabric that makes the commerce possible in the first place. A trading network is not simply ships and goods and ports. It is trust. It is the accumulated trust of families who have been dealing honestly with other families for generations, who know each other's reputations, who have extended each other credit in difficult seasons and been repaid, who have shared meals in each other's cities, and met each other's children and developed, across the years, a relationship that goes beyond the commercial into something that the commercial depends on but cannot create by itself. Carthage is built on this trust the way it is built on the harbor, as a fundamental infrastructure, as a thing that makes everything else possible. And the afternoon is when the trust is maintained, in the conversations, in the shared shade, in the food passed between people and the news exchanged and the small favors done, and the long-standing relationships renewed by the simple, powerful act of being present to each other in the unhurried middle of a day. By late afternoon, The city's second energy has arrived. The market has reopened, or rather, has never fully closed, but has shifted its character with the shift in the light. The morning's high-volume urgency giving way to the afternoon's more selective, more deliberate commerce. The buyers who come to market in the late afternoon are not the bulk buyers of the morning, stocking the household for the week or acquiring the raw materials for a week's production. They are the people who want the particular thing, the specific item, the one object that requires inspection and consideration, and the kind of attention that the morning's crowds make impossible. You move back through the market toward your own part of the city. The streets are different in the late afternoon, the shadows longer, the light warmer, the pace of the people in them less driven. Children who spent the middle of the day in the elaborate horizontal arrangements of the heat resting have reconstituted themselves into their natural mobile state and are back in the streets with what appears to be fully replenished energy, as if the rest had not merely restored them to their morning levels, but had somehow exceeded them. You stop at the baker's stall again on the way back. The same baker, now in her afternoon mode. The morning's urgent production complete, the afternoon's smaller batches moving at a gentler pace. She has a flatbread that comes off the stone as you arrive, still steaming, and she wraps in a cloth and hands it to you with the efficient warmth of someone who has been serving this particular customer for long enough that the transaction has become a kind of friendship, conducted almost entirely in bread and coin, and the particular quality of acknowledgement that passes between people who see each other every day and have decided, without discussing it, that this daily seeing is one of the things that makes a life feel anchored. You carry the warm bread home through the afternoon streets. Around you, Carthage is moving toward its evening, toward the particular beauty of a harbor city, as the light leaves the water and the sky takes on the colors that only coastlines produce at the end of a day. The ships in the harbor are settling into their evening moorings. The market vendors are beginning the slow process of closing, covering goods, securing stalls, moving the unsold back into storage with the patient acceptance of merchants who know that what didn't sell today will sell tomorrow, and that the market is not a single day, but a continuous, unending river of exchange in which any particular day is simply one current among many. The city is not ending. It is breathing in before the next breath out. And in your house, in your courtyard, under the fig tree that is now throwing its evening shadow all the way to the western wall, the fire is being lit for the evening meal. You can smell it from the street. You can smell the bread in your hands and the oil from the morning and the salt that is everywhere in this city, in the air and the food and the memory. The salt of sea that has been the city's life and its livelihood and its road and its horizon for 500 years. You push open your door. You are home, and the evening, the long, warm, firelit, story-filled evening of a city that knows how to rest as well as it knows how to work, is just beginning. Chapter 3. The temples, the elders, and the stories they kept. The evening in Carthage begins with fire, not the fire of the harbor torches, though those come later. The long line of them along the harbor wall that turns the water between them and their reflections into something that looks less like water and more like a road paved with moving light. Not the cooking fires, though those are already burning in every household, sending their thin columns of smoke into the cooling evening air in a way that always makes the city, seen from the hills above it this hour, look like it is breathing out after a long-held breath. The fire that begins the evening is the one in the temple. You hear it before you see it, or rather, you hear what surrounds it. The sound that comes from the temple district in the early evening is not loud. It is not the sound of crowds or celebration, or the kind of organized noise that announces something important from a distance. It is quieter than that, and in its quietness more present. A low, continuous, almost musical sound that moves through the streets of the upper city the way the smell of the sea moves through the lower city. Pervasive, foundational, something that is simply part of what the air is made of in this place. And at this hour, you have been hearing this sound your entire life. It is the sound of the city in conversation with whatever holds sacred. And tonight, as most evenings, you find yourself moving toward it. The upper city sits on a hill that rises behind the harbor district, the hill that the city's founders chose deliberately. The way people who understand cities always choose hills deliberately, because a hill gives you several things simultaneously that are difficult to achieve any other way. It gives you sight from the upper city. The harbor is visible in its entirety. Every ship, every movement, every arriving and departing vessel readable from this height in a way that the harbor level itself does not allow. The people who need to understand the harbor's full picture, the merchants making decisions about cargo, the officials tracking what enters and leaves the city, the military commanders assessing the state of the fleet. They are all, in one form or another, people who spend time in the upper city, where the full picture is always available. It gives you air. The hill catches a sea breeze before it reaches the lower streets and holds it. The upper city is always several degrees cooler than the harbor district in the middle of the day, and in the evening the breeze that comes off the Mediterranean is cleaner here, less complicated by the smells of commerce and fish and the accumulated heat of thousands of bodies in close proximity. It is the breath of the open sea, arriving relatively unmediated, and it carries in it something that the lower city's air, rich as it is, does not quite contain: a quality of space, of openness, of the reminder that beyond the harbor and beyond the ships and beyond the horizon, there is more world than any city, however great, can fully contain, and it gives you height in the sacred sense. Every culture that has ever built a temple has built it elevated when elevation was available, not because the sacred requires height in any literal sense, but because the human experience of height produces in most people a particular quality of awareness, a widening of perspective, a reduction of the immediate and the specific and the pressing, a sense of standing slightly outside the ordinary scale of things, at a remove from the ground level urgency of daily life, in a place where larger questions have room to be felt if not always answered. The temples of Carthage are on the hill, and you are climbing toward them now, through the streets of the upper city, in the early evening light. The temple district is not a single building. This is something that visitors always misunderstand. The assumption, brought from elsewhere, that the sacred space of city is a single structure with a single purpose and a single deity presiding over it. Carthage does not think about the sacred this way. The temple district is a collection, a neighborhood of sacred spaces, each one with its own character and its own presiding presence and its own community of worshipers, all of them coexisting in the same elevated court of the city in the way that the city's people coexist in the market, in proximity, in mutual awareness, occasionally in conversation, each distinct and each part of something larger than itself. The largest temple faces the harbor. Its orientation is not accidental. Nothing in the city is accidental in its orientation. The Carthaginian builders understood the relationship between a building's position and its meaning, and they place things with the care of people who believe that where something faces tells you something essential about what it is. The harbor-facing temple looks out over the city's life source, the thing that has sustained it from its founding, and this looking out is itself a kind of acknowledgement, a recognition of where the city's sustenance comes from, and a daily architectural act of gratitude. Its columns are limestone, quarried from the hills behind the city and shaped by stonecutters whose skill has been developing in this place for generations. The columns are not the dramatic height of the great temples of the Eastern Mediterranean, which reach for an almost aggressive verticality, straining toward the sky as if trying to leave the earth behind. These are more measured, more grounded. They have a proportion that feels arrived at, considered the product of a long conversation between the builders and the space, and the purpose the building was meant to serve. In the evening light, the limestone takes on the color of warm honey. You stand at the bottom of the temple steps and look up at this for a moment. Inside, the air is different. Every temple you have ever entered has this quality. A different air from the street outside, a different temperature, a different quality of sound and light and smell that the building creates inside itself through the simple mechanisms of thick walls and high ceilings and the particular acoustics of stone interiors. But the difference here is specific to this building, specific to this evening, specific to the particular combination of incense and lamp oil and the accumulated presence of the people who use this space regularly, whose repeated presence leaves something in a room that is not quite visible and not quite smell and not quite sound, but partakes of all three. The lamps are lit along the interior walls, small clay lamps, each one a flame so modest it seems barely worth calling a light individually, but together creating a warm, low, amber illumination that is entirely different from daylight and is, in this difference, exactly what the interior of a sacred space requires. Not the full revelation of daylight, which leaves nothing hidden. The partial, warm, selective light of flame, which illuminates what is nearest and lets everything else exist in the dignified privacy of its own shadow. There are people here, not a crowd, not the organized, structured gathering of a formal ceremony, which happens at specific times in the city's religious calendar and has its own different quality of collective presence. These are the people who come to the temple in the ordinary course of an ordinary evening, drawn by the particular pull that this space has for people who've been coming to it long enough that its pull has become part of their own rhythm. The old man in the corner who's been coming here every evening for 40 years and whose relationship with this space has moved so far beyond conscious practice into something closer to cellular habit that he probably could not explain why he comes any more than he could explain why he breathes. The woman near the altar whose lips are moving very slightly, not in performance, not in the formal recitation of ritual words, but in the quiet, private, almost involuntary speech of someone working something out in the only context where they have ever been able to work it out fully. The young man near the entrance who is not doing anything visible but is simply standing in a particular quality of attention that the space produces in people who are receptive to it. The attention of someone who has arrived somewhere and is allowing the somewhere to act on them before deciding what to do next. You find a place near the wall and you become still. This is what the temple asks of you, not performance, not the correct sequence of words or gestures, though those exist and have their own value. Simply stillness, the willingness to be in a place that is asking you to be in it differently than the street asks you to be in it, and honor that asking by actually doing it. You breathe in the incense and lamp oil air. You let the day settle. The sacred in Carthage is not separate from the daily. This is the understanding that shapes the temple district and everything in it. The understanding that what is holy is not confined to holy buildings or holy hours, but permeates the ordinary life of the city in a way that salt permeates the air near the harbor. The temple is a concentrated space, a place where the sacred quality of everything is gathered together and made explicitly present, made available for encounter in a way that the market or the harbor or the kitchen does not quite manage. But the sacred quality itself is not created in the temple. It exists in the world, and the temple is simply where you go to notice it most clearly. The Carthaginian understanding of the divine is complex in a way that all long-developed theological traditions are complex, layered, internally various, the product of centuries of thinking and questioning and the absorption of ideas from the many cultures that have passed through this trading city and left something of their understanding behind. The primary presences are those that the city has carried since its Phoenician founding, the Great Mother, whose domain is fertility and protection, and the deep continuity of life through all its changes and challenges. The Lord of the Sea, whose relevance to a harbor city needs no explanation, whose moods the sailors read in the color of the water and the behavior of the wind, and the particular formations of cloud on the horizon, that experienced navigators have learned to interpret with the seriousness of people whose lives depend on the interpretation. The protector, whose function is exactly what the name implies. The divine force aligned with the city's safety, invoked by the generals before campaigns, and the mothers before childbirth, and the sailors before the long western voyages into waters where the landmarks that orient you in the Mediterranean simply stop existing. But alongside these, and this is what makes Carthaginian religious life richer and stranger and more interesting than a simple accounting of its principal figures would suggest, are the presences brought by the city's many peoples. The traders who came from Egypt and stayed have brought with them an understanding of the divine that includes the long river and the annual flood and the cycle of death and renewal that the Nile makes visible in the landscape every year. The people from the African interior have brought their own ways of understanding the relationship between the living and the ancestors, ways that the city has not rejected or diminished, but has allowed to exist alongside its own, adding their texture to the whole. A trading city cannot afford theological rigidity. A trading city that closes its doors to the sacred practices of the peoples who come to trade, within it closes its doors to the people themselves. And a city that closes its doors to people has misunderstood what it is and what it is for. Carthage understood this. The diversity of its sacred spaces is not the product of indifference to the question of what is holy. It is the product of a long, pragmatic, and in its own way profound engagement with that question. An engagement that has concluded that the question is large enough to have many answers simultaneously, and that the largeness of the question is itself part of the answer. You leave the temple as the last of the daylight is leaving the sky. The transition from the temple's interior to the evening street is its own particular experience. The reverse of the transition going in, moving from the concentrated amber-warm, incense-scented interior back into the open air of the upper city, where the evening breeze is coming off the sea and the sky above the harbor has turned the particular deep blue of the Mediterranean at the last of the light, and the harbor torches are being lit one by one along the harbor wall in a sequence that, seen from the upper city, has the quality of a long sentence being written in fire. You stand for a moment at the top of the temple steps and look at this, the harbor below, the ships settling into their evening stillness, the torches finding their light one by one, the water between them holding each flame in its double, the real flame above and the reflected flame below, equally bright, equally real to the eye, the city multiplied by the sea in the way that harbor cities are always doubled at night by the water that surround them. You could stand here every evening for the rest of your life, and this view would not use itself up. You have tested this hypothesis. You have been testing it since you were old enough to walk up this hill on your own. You are no closer to the bottom of it. The elder's house is 3 streets from the temple, and has been 3 streets from the temple for longer than the current elder has been alive. The position of the elder's house in relation to the temple is not accidental. Very little in this city's geography is accidental. When you look at it long enough, the elder and the temple are neighbors because the elder and the temple serve related functions in the life of the city's people. One is the place where the sacred is made explicit and concentrated and directly present. The other is the place where the accumulated human wisdom of the community, which is a different kind of sacred, harder to name but no less real, is kept and made available to whoever needs it. You have been coming to this house since childhood. The elder who receives you tonight is not the elder who received you first in those childhood visits. That elder has been gone for 20 years, gone in the way of people who have lived so fully and so long that their departure, when it came, felt less like a loss than a completion. The elder before her is a memory so old it has become story rather than memory. And the elder before that is simply the past, known only through what the subsequent elders carried forward of what they had received. But the house is the same. This is a remarkable thing. The house changes its inhabitant, changes the face and the hands and the particular quality of wisdom that sits in the chair by the window. But the house itself, the walls of it, the courtyard, the large room where the conversations happen, the particular smell of old wood and lamp oil and the dried herbs that hang from the ceiling beams and bundles whose purpose is partly medicinal and partly simply that someone has always hung herbs from these beams, and the hanging has become part of what? The house is. All of this remains. Continuity lives in buildings when it has nowhere else to go. There are 6 of you in the room tonight. This is not an unusual number for an evening at the elder's house. The gatherings here are not organized or announced. They happen the way the best conversations happen, through the accumulation of people who find themselves drawn to the same place at the same time for reasons they could not entirely articulate if pressed. Someone passes the elder street on the way home from the harbor and thinks, without deciding to think it, without planning it, I will stop in. And then they stop in, and there is someone already there. And then someone else arrives. And by the time the evening is established, there's a circle and a fire in the small hearth, and the conversation has found its natural level. The elder tonight is a woman of considerable age whose specific age no one knows precisely, including, she says, herself. She has the quality of very old people who have remained fully engaged in their own minds, whose intelligence is not dim but has simply changed character over the decades, moving from the quick and acquisitive intelligence of youth toward the slower, deeper, more integrative intelligence of age. The intelligence that does not race to answer but waits, and in the waiting often arrives somewhere the racing never reached. She sits in the chair by the window as she always sits, straight backed in a way that is not effortful, the way that people who have always held themselves well hold themselves well. Her hands rest in her lap with a particular stillness of hands that have done a great deal of work over many decades and have earned their rest, though they are still capable of animation when the conversation requires it, when a point needs making that the voice alone cannot carry. She is telling a story. She is almost always telling a story when you arrive. This is one of the constants of the elder's house, that the story is always already underway when you enter, and that your entry does not interrupt it. You simply find your place in a room, and the story absorbs you into itself, the way a river absorbs a tributary, incorporating what you bring without breaking its own movement. The story tonight is about the city's founding, not the official version, not the polished, formal account that is recited at civic ceremonies and taught to children in the structured way of things that need to be transmitted accurately and completely. The story the elder tells is the older version underneath the official one, the version that remembers not just what happened but what it felt like, what the queen was thinking in the long weeks on the ship, when the coast she was heading for was still a rumor, and the coast she had left was far enough behind to be painful to remember, what the people who followed her were carrying in themselves alongside what they carried in their hands. The fear, the uncertainty, the specific grief of people who left a place they loved because the place became impossible, and who do not yet know if the new place will become something they can love instead. This is the version the elder tells, the human version, the one where the founding queen is not simply a clever woman with a good idea about the ox hide, but a person, a full, complex, frightened, determined, grieving, extraordinary person, making decisions under pressure that she could not have known would still matter 500 years later. The listening in the room has a particular quality. You know this quality. You have felt it in this room before, and in other rooms where good stories are being told. The quality and attention that has become collective, that is synchronized across the different people in the room into something that functions almost like a single awareness, where each person is individually present to the story, but is also, through the story, present to every other person in the room in a way that ordinary conversation does not quite achieve. The story is the medium through which the group becomes, briefly and beautifully, more than a collection of individuals. Your breathing has slowed. You notice this without trying to notice it, without making an observation, without the part of you that observes and classifies and categorizes being involved. You simply find at some point that your breath is slower and fuller than it was when you came in, and that your body has settled more completely into the chair you're sitting in, and that the sounds from the street outside have moved further away without having actually moved at all. This is what a good story does to a body. It is one of the oldest technologies in the human world. The technology of the story told well, in the right space, at the right hour, by someone who has been telling stories long enough to know that the story is not something you push at the listener, but something you open and invite and allow to move at its own pace toward wherever it was always going. The elder pauses in the telling, not a pause of forgetting or searching. She is not a person who loses the thread. It is the pause of someone who knows exactly where they are in the story and has chosen this particular moment to let the silence hold what the words have just put into the room, to let the weight of it settle before the next thing is added. In the pause, the fire in the small hearth speaks. The sound of a burning fire is one of the most layered sounds in the world. It is not a single sound, but dozens of sounds simultaneously, each tiny combustion event adding its voice to the whole resolving into something that is both random and rhythmic, both unpredictable in its specifics and utterly consistent in its general character. It is the sound of transformation, of one thing becoming another, of energy moving from a fixed form into light and heat, and the particular smell of a releasing everything it has been holding. You look at it while the pause holds. The fire in this room has been burning, in one form or another, for as long as the elder's house has been a place where people come in the evenings to talk and listen. Different fires, different wood, different hands that laid the wood and coaxed the first flame and tended the burning to the hours of conversation. But the same fire in the sense that matters. The continuity of a practice that has been performed in this space. So many times it has become part of what the space is. The elder resumes. She tells you about the harbor, not the harbor as it is now, not the one you walked beside this morning, with its warships and its merchant fleet and its harbor torches beginning their evening sequence along the wall. The harbor as it was at the beginning, the small, provisional harbor of a new settlement on an unfamiliar coast, a harbor that was more aspiration and achievement, more wooden scaffolding and temporary moorings than the engineered permanence of what it would eventually become. She tells you that the Queen stood at that harbor's edge every evening of the first year, not out of anxiety, or not only out of anxiety, because the first year was genuinely difficult and anxiety was a reasonable companion to the enterprise. She stood there because the sea was the connection. The sea was the thread that ran back to everything that had been left behind. The people who had not come, the city that had been lost, the life that had been replaced by this one. And the sea was also simultaneously the possibility, the road in every direction, the thing that brought her here and would bring others here after her, and would take her people's ships to every shore that mattered and return them with everything a new city needed to become an old one. She stood at the harbor and she held both of these truths at once. The elder says, the loss and the possibility, the grief and the determination, the past that was behind her on the water and the future that was in front of her on the same water. This, the elder says, is what made her the kind of founder who produces a kind of city that this city became. Not the cleverness with the ox hide, though that was real and that mattered, but the capacity to hold the fullness of a moment without simplifying it, to feel the loss completely and the possibility completely, and not require either one to diminish the other. A city built by someone with that capacity carries a capacity in itself. You have always known this, in some form, without having the words for it. You know it in the way you know the city, in the body, in the feet, in the particular quality of belonging that this place produces in the people who grow up inside it, a belonging that is not simple or uncomplicated, but is full, that includes the difficulty of the city alongside its beauty, the demands it makes alongside the gifts it gives, the losses that are woven into its history alongside the extraordinary things that history also contains. Carthage is not a perfect place. No city is a perfect place. And any story that tells you otherwise is a story that has decided to leave things out. There is poverty here alongside the wealth. There is injustice here alongside the law. There are people in this city who do not share equally in what the city's commerce produces, whose labor makes possible the comfort of others without adequately returning to them what that labor is worth. The elder does not leave these things out. This is what makes her worth listening to. She tells the full version, the version that holds the city's magnificence and its failures with the same honesty, the same refusal to simplify that the founding queen brought to harbor in the first year. Because a city that only tells itself the beautiful parts of its own story is a city that has stopped learning from itself, that has chosen the comfort of a flattering mirror over the usefulness of an accurate one. The full story is harder. It is also, in every way that matters, better. The fire has burned lower by the time the story arrives at its natural resting place, not its ending. The stories told in this room do not end the way that constructed narratives end, with resolution and conclusion and the sense of a door closing. They arrive at a resting place, a place where what has been said has reached its natural weight in the silence after it is not empty but full of everything the words have put into motion, which continues moving in the minds of people who heard it long after the speaking has stopped. The silence in the room after the elder finishes is one of the best silences you have sat inside. You are aware of this even as you are inside it, aware that this quality of shared silence, produced by shared listening, is something you cannot manufacture or arrange or achieve by intention. It arrives or it doesn't. Tonight has arrived, and the room holds it gently, the way cupped hands hold water. Outside, the city is in its evening. The harbor torches are all lit now, the full line of them visible from the upper city as a continuous warm line along the water's edge. The reflections of them making the harbor at night look like a road paved with moving fire. The streets of the upper city are quieter than the lower streets, which retain their evening life longer because the harbor never fully sleeps. Up here, the evening belongs to households and their fires, to the conversations happening around them, to the particular quality of the city's nightlife that is not spectacular, but is deeply, warmly real. Someone in the room begins to speak, quietly, in the tentative way of someone adding something to a silence they don't want to break but can't quite hold any longer. They're asking the elder something about the founding story, about one of the details, about how she knows what she knows. The elder smiles. She says, "I know it the way you will know it, because someone who knew it sat with me in a room like this one when I was young, and told it to me the way I am telling it to you. And before her, someone sat with her. And before that, someone sat with them." She pauses. She says, "The story is not mine. It never was. I am simply where it is living right now, until I pass it on. And now I have passed some of it to you, which means you are carrying it too, whether you intended to or not." She says this without drama, without the emphasis of someone delivering a lesson that they want to make sure lands. Simply as a fact, the calm, practical, slightly amused tone of someone stating something obvious that has somehow not yet been said. The room receives it, you receive it, and somewhere in the receiving, somewhere in the quiet that follows it, in the fire's low voice and the evening air coming to the window, and the harbor torches visible in the distance in the slow, full breath that your body takes without being asked to take it, you feel the weight of what she has said settle into you. You are carrying it now. The story of a woman on a ship in the dark with the coast she loved behind her, and the coast she was headed to still invisible ahead. The story of a harbor built from aspiration and determination over 500 years into something that holds the world's goods and the world's people and the world's trust. The story of a city that learned to hold loss and possibility simultaneously and built, from that holding, something that has lasted longer than anyone who began it could have imagined. You are carrying it the way the city carries everything that's been given, in the living of it, in the daily presence to it, in the ordinary mornings and market hours and harbor views and temple silences that are themselves a story, always being added to, never complete, never needing to be complete. This is how Carthage endures, not in monuments, though there are monuments, not in documents, though there are documents, in the people who carry it, in the rooms where the fire burns low and the elder speaks and the listeners become, without knowing the exact moment it happens, the next keepers of what has been said. You are one of them now. You have always been one of them. You just hadn't been told in so many words until tonight. Chapter 4, The Last Light Over the Mediterranean. You leave the elder's house when the night is fully established. Not late, not the deep, still hours that belong to sleepers and the occasional harbor watchman, and the cats that own the upper city streets after midnight with a confidence that suggests they have always known the city belongs to them and are simply waiting for everyone else to acknowledge it. The night is young enough that people are still moving in the streets, still returning from the places the evening has taken them, still carrying their faces and their pace the particular quality of a person who has had a good evening and is now bringing it home. You carry your own good evening with you. It sits inside you the way a well-made meal sits, not heavy, not demanding, not requiring anything further, simply present, warm in a way that is not entirely physical. The warmth of having been somewhere that mattered, of having heard something that rearranged something in you, of having sat in a room with people and a fire and a story and arrived, by those simple means, somewhere further along in yourself than you were when you entered. The streets of the upper city at this hour have a quality of their own. During the day, these streets are purposeful, full of people moving between the temple district and the civic buildings and the houses of the merchants and officials who prefer the elevated air and the harbor view that the upper city provides. There is a quality of transaction to them. Even the quieter ones, the sense of a place that is being used rather than simply inhabited. At night, this falls away. What remains is the city underneath the city, the stone and the starlight and particular quality of Mediterranean night air, which is not the cold and heavy air of northern nights, but something lighter, more permeable, carrying the warmth of the day in it still, but beginning its slow release of that warmth back to the sky. The streets in this air, in this light, the lamplight from the occasional window, the far torches of the harbor wall, the white light of the stars are fully out now above the upper city, are the streets of the place as it is when no one needs anything from it, when it is simply itself. You take the long way home. This is a decision you make without quite deciding it. You take a turn that is not the most direct route, and you do not correct it, because the evening has produced in you the particular state that occasionally follows a good story and a good silence, the state in which the ordinary pull of destination loses some of its authority, and you find yourself willing to go a little further before arriving. The long way takes you along the edge of the upper city where the hill begins its slope down toward the harbor district, and where, between two buildings at a certain point in the path, there's a gap that frames the harbor and the sea beyond in a way that has no architectural explanation. It is simply where two buildings were built at an angle that left a space between them, a gap that has been there since the buildings were built, and that has been providing this view to whoever walked past it ever since. You stop at the gap. Below you and beyond you, the harbor. At night, it is different from the daytime view you stood in this morning. Different in the way that all familiar things are different at night, transformed by the removal of color and the addition of flame and particular depth that darkness gives to distances. The harbor torches make their long line along the wall, each one a separate and slightly trembling point of warm light. There are reflections in the water below them, making that long line double. Real fire above, mirror fire below, the dark water between them holding both with equal patience. The ships are dark shapes against the slightly lighter dark of the open water beyond the harbor mouth. Their masts rise from the harbor in the silhouettes you know so well, the shapes your eyes have learned to read as fluently as they read faces. The particular profile of the round-hulled merchant vessels, the sleeker outline of the faster ships, the long, low, dangerous shape of the warships along the military harbor's inner edge. The sea beyond the harbor is not visible as a surface. At night, the open Mediterranean loses its daytime specificity and becomes simply dark, a darkness that is distinct from the darkness of the land because it moves. The slight, constant, rhythmic movement of open water that is never entirely still, that has no stillness available to it because of forces that move it, the wind, the tides, the deep currents that travel its length from east to west and back, never fully rest. The darkness out there shifts. It breathes. It has a quality of living darkness that the land's darkness does not quite have. You look at it for a long time. There is something the sea does to you on evenings like this one, something that you would struggle to put into words if you were asked to, which is itself part of what it does. It takes you to a place that is slightly beyond the reach of your own language, slightly outside the part of yourself that is always ready with description, a category, a word for the thing being experienced. It takes you to the part of yourself that exists before language, that existed in some form before you were old enough to have language, when the world was simply sensation and presence, and the fact of being alive inside it, without the mediation of everything you have learned since to put between yourself and the raw experience of that aliveness. The sea does this by being larger than you, by being older than you, by being indifferent to you in the precise way that makes its attention, when you feel it, feel like something given rather than something owed. The sea does not care that you are standing here. The sea does not notice you're standing here in any meaningful sense. And because it does not notice, because its vastness and its continuity are entirely independent of your presence or absence, the fact of standing here and looking at it anyway, the fact of choosing to be present to something that does not require your presence, becomes the kind of gift you give to yourself. The harbor torches reflect in the water below you. Each reflection trembles with the movement of the water surface, so that the reflected fires are not still points like the real ones above them, but living things, flickering, shifting, constantly almost disappearing and reconstituting themselves. The fire's reality doubled and made more real by the instability of its double. You watch them for a while. You watch them until watching becomes simply being, until the distinction between the one who watches and the thing being watched softens at its edges. And what remains is simply the experience of this place and this hour And this particular quality of light on water, unmediated, immediate, as real as anything that has ever been real to you. The city sounds at night are different from the city sounds of the day. This is obvious in one sense. Of course, a city at night sounds different from a city in the daytime. But the difference is not simply one of volume, not simply the day's noise diminished to the night's quiet. The sounds themselves change character. New sounds emerge that the day's noise covers. The particular cry of a harbor bird that hunts at night, lower and stranger than the daytime calls. The creak of the ship's mooring ropes as the vessels shift with the harbor's slight movement, a sound that is there during the day too, but is lost in the general noise and becomes audible only when everything around it has quieted enough to give it room. And the sound of the harbor water itself, which is not a single sound but collection, the accumulated speaking of water against stone and wood and rope in all the variations that the harbor's geography produces. The slap of a small wave against a hull, the lower, more continuous conversation of the water moving along the harbor wall, the occasional drip of something, condensation from a rope's end, water running off a mooring post, hitting the surface in particular sharp, small sound of a single drop falling from a height. You have grown up with these sounds. They are the sounds of home, the way the smell of salt air is the smell of home, not noticed most of the time, because the things that are always present become invisible to the awareness that monitors for change, but available, always available, when you are quiet enough to receive them, when the day is finished in your attention, releasing the demands of the daylight hours, is free to settle on what's been here all along. You begin the walk home through the quieting streets. The route down from the upper city to your part of the lower city takes you through several distinct neighborhoods, each one with its own character, its own evening sounds, its own quality of inhabited nighttime. The neighborhood of the weavers, where the looms are quiet now, but the smell of dyed cloth still hangs in the air, a faintly chemical, faintly floral smell that is the smell of color being fixed into fiber, the smell of the craft that produces the bright cloth you see in the market every morning. The neighborhood of the metalworkers, where the forges have been banged for hours, but the heat of them has not fully left the air near their doors, a warmth that is slightly different from the ambient warmth of night, more focused, more intentional, the warmth of managed fire rather than the warmth of an entire day's sun stored in stone. The neighborhood of the families, your neighborhood, the one you have always lived in, the one that has always had this particular combination of sounds in the evening. A child being settled by a voice you have heard through walls your whole life. A dog somewhere expressing an opinion about something at the edge of its territory. The low murmur of a conversation between two people sitting in their courtyard in the last of the evening, keeping company in the comfortable way of people who've been keeping each other's company for a long time. Your street, narrow, stone-worn, lamplit at this hour by the occasional small flame in a holder on a wall. The baker's door is closed and dark. She will be asleep now, resting the arms and the hands that were working before dawn, gathering the strength that will be needed again before dawn tomorrow. Her bread is in the houses of the people who bought it this morning, part of suppers that were eaten hours ago, nourishing the sleep of the people who consumed them in a way that bread has nourished sleep since the first person understood that grain and water and heat and time could be combined into the most fundamental food the world has ever produced. Your door, you push it open, and step into the courtyard. The fig tree at the center of the courtyard is different at night. During the day, it is green and solid and specific. Every leaf defined, every branch traceable from trunk to tip, the whole available to inspection and familiar in its availability. At night, in the light that comes from the single lamp burning by the door, it becomes something else. The leaves are dark, not black, but a deep, rich, velvet dark that makes them look less like leaves and more like the shapes of leaves, like the essential idea of what a leaf is rather than any particular leaf-specific reality. The courtyard is cool, not cold. The stone has held the day's warmth through the evening, as stone does, releasing it slowly into the night air in a transaction that will take until the small hours to complete. But cool enough to be pleasant, to be the right temperature for the transition that is coming. The transition from the day's engagement with the world to the night's disengagement from it. The slow letting go that a body begins when it knows that rest is near. You sit in the courtyard for a while before going inside. This is a habit so old you cannot remember its beginning. Sitting in the courtyard in the last of the evening, in the fig tree's dark canopy and the lamplight and the sound of the city having its final conversations before the night takes them. You have been doing this since you were young enough to sit in this courtyard unsupervised and old enough to want to, which was surprisingly early age given how good the courtyard has always been at producing particular quality of quiet that makes sitting in it for no reason feel like a reason in itself. Above the courtyard walls, the sky, the stars are at their fullest visibility now, the deep night having taken away whatever remained of the day's scattered light, leaving the sky as dark and clear as it ever gets above a city of this size. The great sweep of them from wall to wall of the courtyard's open ceiling, not the full sky, but a rectangle of it, framed by the courtyard's four walls, which makes it at once smaller and more concentrated than the open sky of the hilltop or the sea view. This framing does something to the stars, gives them a context, makes them paradoxically more visible for being seen through a limited frame than they are when the entire sky is available at once. The way a window makes a landscape more itself by giving it a border. The way a story makes a life more visible by giving it a shape. You look at them for a long time. The day settles in you as you sit. This is what the courtyard is for, among other things. It is a room between the world and the sleep. The decompression chamber. The place where the day's accumulated experience is allowed to find its level before you take it with you into the dark. You are not trying to process it. You are not reviewing it or evaluating it, or making plans for how tomorrow will be different or the same. You are simply letting it be what it was, a full day in a full city, rich with everything that a day in this particular city provides, and demanding in the way that all richness is demanding, because abundance requires management, and abundance received well as its own form of work. The morning on the harbor wall, with the water below you and the ships beginning their day, and the smell of the fish market behind you, and the bread warm in your hand. The market with its layered sounds and smells, and the glass bead cool and smooth in your palm, and the merchant who waited in silence while the bead did its own work. The midday shade and the food pass between people, and the news from the western ship, and the traveler from the north who speaks no recognizable language and carries in his presence the reality of a world that extends beyond anything most people in this city will ever directly encounter. The temple, the lamplight and the incense, and the old man in the corner, and the woman with her moving lips, and the quality of attention that a sacred space produces in people who come to it honestly. The elder's house, the fire in the circle, and the story told in the full version. The founding queen on the ship in the dark, holding loss and possibility in the same hands, standing in a harbor that was barely a harbor yet, and looking at the same sea you've been looking at all day, the same water, the same horizon, the same stars. All of it settles. All of it finds its place in a larger accumulation of days that is a life lived in one place. The way a river's water finds its level, the way sediment finds a riverbed, the way everything that comes into a place eventually comes to rest in it and becomes part of what it is. You are what the city has made you. You are the morning harbor and the market and the bread and the oil and the glass bead and the afternoon shade and the temple silence and the elder's story and the fig tree and the courtyard and the stars. You are 500 years of the city's life, carried in the specific form of one person who was born here and grew up here and will likely grow old here, and who knows, without having to think about it, that there is nowhere else they would rather have been given. This is not a small thing. This is, in fact, the largest thing. The largest thing in a life is a feeling of belonging to the place you are in, of being genuinely, non-performatively, in the deepest available sense at home. Not everyone gets this. Many people spend their entire lives looking for it, and arriving at the end of their search still uncertain whether they ever truly found it. You have had it since before you were old enough to know that not everyone has it. Tonight, for the first time, you felt the weight of that, not as burden but as gift. Felt it fully, in the way that the elder's story opened something that allowed the full feeling in. You are grateful. The gratitude is quiet. It is not the gratitude of an extraordinary moment, of something rare and arresting that demands a response. It is the gratitude of ordinary recognition, of a person who has been given something very good and has been, for once, fully awake to the giving. The city is very quiet now. The last conversations have found their endings. The last lamps in the neighboring houses have gone dark. The harbor sounds continue. They always continue. The water and a rope creak and the occasional cry of the night bird. But they have settled into a particular quality that nighttime harbor sounds have in the deep hours, when the human activity that gives them their daytime context is gone, and they become simply the sound of the sea and the city in their oldest and most basic relationship. The city at the water's edge. The water at the city's edge. Each one defining the other. Each one the context in which the other makes sense. Neither one possible without the other. You breathe in the courtyard air one more time. Salt and stone and fig leaf and the faint warmth still rising from the courtyard sun-warmed floor. The smell of a city at rest. The smell of your home. You stand slowly. Your body is ready, has been ready for some time, has been signaling its readiness with the particular language of physical tiredness that is not the desperate tiredness of exhaustion, but the satisfied tiredness of a body that has done a full day's work and received a full day's life in return, and is now, without drama and without urgency, ready to rest. You go inside. Your room is exactly as you left it this morning. This is one of the quiet reliefs of a day fully lived, returning to a space that has been holding itself for you in your absence, unchanged, waiting with the patient availability of a place that knows its purpose. The sleeping mat, the walls the color of the inside of a shell, The small high window that will let in the morning light in exactly the way it always lets in the morning light, at the angle that has always been its angle, producing on the floor the rectangle of gold that has always been the signal that the morning has arrived. You lie down. The mat receives you with the particular give of something that has conformed itself to you over time, that has taken the shape of your weight and your preferred position through countless repetitions, and now meets you where you are rather than requiring you to adjust to it. This is a comfort that cannot be purchased new, that only comes from long use, from the accumulated intimacy of many nights in the same place, the body and the bed becoming gradually more fluent in each other. You close your eyes. The darkness behind them is immediate and complete and entirely welcoming. In the darkness, the day continues for a moment. This is what happens in the first moments of lying down when the day has been full. The images and sounds of it continue briefly, like a river that keeps moving for a short distance after the rain that fed it has stopped. The harbor in the morning gold, the market sounds, the glass bead, the elder's face in the firelight, the founding queen on the ship in the dark, the harbor torches and their reflections, the fig tree against the stars. They move through you without requiring anything, without asking you to hold them or manage them or do anything at all with them beyond simply allowing them to be what they are. The day's experience, finding its way into the larger collection of days that constitute a life, settling in alongside everything that came before, becoming part of the ongoing, cumulative, entirely unrepeatable story of one person inside one city, inside one moment, in the long history of the world. You are that person. This is your city. This is your moment. And here's the thing that no one tells you when you are young. The thing that takes years of ordinary days to understand, that cannot be rushed or taught directly, but only arrived at through the accumulation of enough mornings and evenings and market hours and harbor views and elder stories that the understanding finally has enough material to build itself from. The thing is this: the ordinary day is the extraordinary thing, not the exceptional day, not the day of great events or celebrated moments or the things that get written down and passed forward as the significant occurrences of a life. Those have their own importance and their own particular weight. But the ordinary day, the day like today, the day that began with the sea sound and the courtyard and the baker's bread, and moved through the market and the harbor and the temple and the elder's house, and arrived here, at this mat, in this room, in this city. The ordinary day is the thing that a life is actually made of. It is the material. Every ordinary day you have lived has been added to the structure of who you are, not dramatically, not in ways you can identify individually, but cumulatively, in the way that water shapes stone, invisible in any given moment, undeniable across enough moments. The market visits and the harbor views and the conversations and the stories heard and the bread bought and the oil poured and the stars watched in the courtyard, all of it building, layer by layer, the specific person that you are. Carthage built itself the same way, not in single acts of extraordinary will, though there were those too, in the accumulated ordinary days of 500 years of people living here, going to the market, sailing the harbor, climbing the hill to the temple, sitting in the elder's house, lying down on their sleeping mats in the rooms of their houses, and listening to the sea sound in the dark and feeling, at the end of each full day, what you are feeling now. This, exactly this. The satisfaction of a life being lived in the right place. The deep, quiet rightness of being home. The sea sound comes through the small, high window. It is very faint from here, attenuated by the distance from the harbor and the walls of the city and the walls of this house and the walls of this room, arriving finally as barely more than a suggestion, a whisper of the thing itself rather than the thing, the memory of the harbor sound rather than the harbor sound. But it is there. It has always been there in this room at this hour, the faintest reach of the sea making itself known through all the walls and distances between, arriving here where you lie and saying simply, the water is still moving, the harbor is still breathing, the ships are still at their moorings, the torches are still burning along the harbor wall, the city is still what it is. Everything is as it should be. Everything is exactly as it should be. Your breathing slows. It happens without your participation. The body taking over the pace of things, as the body always does when it has been given sufficient permission. The breath that was the breath of a person awake and present to the world becomes, degree by degree, the breath of a person returning to the older, simpler, more fundamental state. The state that was there before the morning and will be there after the morning and is, in some sense, the ground for which the day rises and into which it returns. The city holds you. The walls of the house hold you. The mat holds you. The darkness holds you. The faint sea sound holds you. The memory of the elders' fire holds you. The founding queen holds you. Still on her ship, still at her harbor's edge, still holding the loss and the possibility in the same hands. Still the person at the beginning of something that became everything you have known your entire life. You are held in Carthage. You are held in 500 years of people who built this place day by day and morning by morning, and loved it the way you love it, with the full, uncomplicated, inexhaustible love of people for the ground that made them. You belong here. You have always belonged here. Let the sound of the sea carry you now. Let it do what it has always done in the deep hours of the city's night. Move through the darkness at the edges of things, constant and unhurried. The oldest voice in the valley of the Mediterranean, older than Carthage and older than the ships and older than the first person who ever stood at a shoreline and felt the pull of the horizon and thought, there is something beyond that edge that I have not yet seen. Let it carry you past the edge of the day and into the larger dark where the sleep is. The sleep that restores. The sleep that takes the full, beautiful, demanding, extraordinary, ordinary day and makes it into material of tomorrow. The sleep that every citizen of this city takes tonight. The merchant and the baker and the sailor and the weaver and the elder and the child tucked against the warmth of a parent's chest, all of them breathing together in the dark, the whole enormous breathing city at rest, the harbor torches burning at the water's edge, the ships moving very gently in the harbor's slow breath, the stars overhead making their ancient circuit as they have made it above this coastline every night since before. There was a city here to notice them. The city is asleep, and you are part of the city. And the city is part of you. Close your eyes. The sea is still there. The harbor is still there. The fig tree in your courtyard is holding its leaves against the night sky, dark and patient and entirely itself. The elder's fire is burned down to its embers, deep quiet, red, the warmth of them still radiating into the room where the story was told, where it will be told again, where the story is always being told. where you're always arriving and always sitting down and always receiving what has been waiting to be given to you. The founding queen is at her harbor's edge. She is looking at the same stars. She is breathing the same salt air. She is holding in her hands everything that will become, over 500 years of ordinary days, the city that you know as home. She does not know yet what it will become. She knows only that it is worth building. And so she begins, and the beginning never ends. It is always happening. Always the first morning on this coast. Always the first stone placed on another stone with the intention of permanence. Always the first fire lit in the first courtyard of the first house of the city that will one day hold several 100,000 people, and the stories of all of them. You are one of those stories. You are tonight in a part of the story where the day is done and the night is full and the sea sounds and the sleep comes and the city rests in its harbor between one day and the next, whole and breathing and entirely beautifully real. Rest now. Let Carthage hold you. Let the Mediterranean night wrap itself around the city and around the harbor and around the streets and the courtyards and the fig trees and the sleeping faces and around you, specifically, personally, warmly around you, the way the night has always wrapped itself around this particular stretch of African coastline, with the patient care of someone that has been doing this for a very long time and finds the doing of it enough. You are in Carthage. You are home. Sleep well. The sea is still moving, and you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Good night.